So I've never done a tier list on my channel, but I figured with the release of Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, it might be fun to just go through very quick, give my short, concise thoughts on every single movie within the MCU until I give my full in-depth ranking in November once the Marvels releases. This is going to be pretty laid back. We're just going to go through every movie pretty quick, talk about it, move on to the next one. So, kicking it off with Iron Man, the one that started it all. This is a movie that I've loved since it came out, and just over the years, I've continued to love it more and more. I still think it set a very high standard for the universe, and without this movie, we wouldn't have gotten the rest of these movies on this list. Tony Stark is my favorite character in the MCU. This is where it all started. You know what? I'm gonna put this movie in the S tier. I'm gonna move it all the way up into the S tier. Moving on to The Incredible Hulk. This movie is kind of confusing because obviously the Hulk is not the same Hulk that we know today, and the movie itself as a whole feels very disconnected, especially in the grand scheme of things. I think it gets too much hate. It's good enough, but it's not great. So for that, I'll put this movie on the C level. Then we have Iron Man 2, or Set Up the movie. There's a lot of good concepts in this movie. There's a lot of great ideas. There's some moments throughout that I think are some of the best in the MCU as a whole. There's some stuff to love, but overall it just felt like he was trying to do way too much. And obviously Jon Favreau was not given nearly enough time to make the movie, so it's not great. It's not the worst though, and for that reason, I'm gonna put it in the D category. Then we have Thor. This is when you could tell that they were really building towards something bigger. There's a lot of things that I like about this movie. I enjoy the fish out of water aspect, and I think Chris Hemsworth as the character is pretty fitting. His chemistry with Jane Foster in this movie is good enough for the most part, but it just felt a little bit tonally all over the place, from being a comic book movie to also being this fish out of water movie about a guy from another planet coming to Earth. It's okay, but it's definitely not great. I would say it's the definition of mid-tier. I'm gonna put this in the C category. Then we have Captain America, the First Avenger. I like this movie a lot. Aside from the reveal of Red Skull and the villain as a whole, I like that the film takes place in the past, in the war, and getting the origin of Steve Rogers' character. And this is a movie that I've always enjoyed, and I remember especially loving it a lot when I was a little kid. And it's just kind of stuck with me. I would have to put this in the B tier. It's not great, but it's solid. Okay, here's another hot take for you, Avengers. I think this movie is not as good as everybody says it is. Now, I get that everybody was freaking out when it first came out because it was a cultural phenomenon, and it was a big thing that we had not yet seen at that point. All of these grand superheroes coming together in one movie to team up and take down the big bad. I just think the big bad was not that great. Aside from Loki, I find the Battle of New York to be extremely underwhelming and just sort of a CGI fest that was just way too much. And a lot of this movie is also spent with these characters not necessarily building a team, but more so just arguing with each other. There's stuff to appreciate. There's stuff that I like. It's not a bad movie. I just don't think it's incredible. It's fine. See? People are gonna hate me. It's okay. I'm just being me. All right. Hot take again. Iron Man 3. I love this movie. Love it so much. This is the first time in the MCU where they really battled with the idea of grief and anxiety and depression. Tony Stark was been just put through the ringer up to this point, and in this movie, you really see the effects of that. He's really struggling to get a hold of himself. His morals are tested. His will is tested here. It gets a little fantastical and out there with the reveal, and of course the Mandarin twist. I don't think it's that bad, but a lot of people hate it. But man, Shane Black made a heck of a movie. I'm gonna have to throw it in the B tier, but I'm gonna put it ahead of Captain America, the First Avenger. Okay, if you didn't hate me before, you definitely do now. Then we have Thor: The Dark World. This movie's just bad. It's just bad. I don't think it's terrible from a filmmaking perspective, but story-wise and just narratively, it's boring. And I think the worst thing a movie can be is boring. I'm gonna have to put that in the F tier. Captain America: The Winter Soldier. This was one of my favorites for a long time, and it's still in my top 10 for sure. I think the Russos brought a new flavor to the universe, and I think what this movie did, it is exactly what people are looking for and why superhero movies work. when they work. It told a spy espionage thriller story with the shell of a superhero story. I think that's when comic book movies work the best, is when they're not characterized by being a comic book movie, when they actually have a compelling story on their own that fits into a bigger cosmic universe. The movie felt grounded and realistic. The action was brutal. Bucky as the Winter Soldier here is good. The twist with Hydra is great. Now it's dropped a little bit over the years, but it's still one of my most enjoyable rewatches. I would have to put this in the A tier. Guardians of the Galaxy. This is by far the biggest surprise in the MCU to me. It's probably the most rewatched movie for me on this list. James Gunn really brought his style behind the camera. These characters are all great, and while nobody really knew about them when this movie first came out, now they're some of the most beloved characters in the entire universe, and I think that's just a testament to the writing, how all the characters are very fleshed out. You feel for them, and you begin to love them and grow attached to them very quickly. Ronan is a very forgettable villain, just like Malekith in Thor the Dark World, but I don't feel like the movie has too much weight set on how good the villain is. It's just about introducing these characters, having a fun time. Obviously, the soundtrack is great. They struck gold with this one. It's still in my top 5. I would have to put Guardians of the Galaxy in the S tier. I just love this movie. You hear that? It's another hot take coming. Avengers Age of Ultron. I'm putting this in the B tier. I really enjoy this movie. I think it's better than the first one.
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
But I think it just did what the first movie was trying to do much better. I love the character motivations a lot better. I think the story's a lot more interesting. The action's more fun. And I also think Ultron is a somewhat underrated villain. Now, he wasn't as fleshed out as he possibly could have been, but for what we got, man, he's killer. We get Wanda in this movie. That's enough for me to love it. Then we have Ant-Man. I'm putting this in the A tier. Since this movie came out, I've absolutely loved it. It's much more small scale, because he's an ant. Get it? Because he's small. It's a small scale movie. Yeah, you don't? Okay. I love the journey of turning this character who was once a criminal into a hero, making him realize his worth and his value is way beyond what he ever could have imagined. And Luis's monologues, going on a rant about the story and how everything happened, giving these recaps, is just incredible. I've said it before, I'll say it again, we could have an entire Disney Plus MCU series just about him recalling the entire events of the MCU up to this point, and I would be there day one. Then we have Captain America Civil War. This is a movie that I've always been lower on than most people, but over time, I went back and rewatched it recently, and I think I've grown to like it a bit more. I think it does do a lot of great things, obviously with the conflict of the movie, but also just pinning all of these characters against each other and pitting the audience against some of their favorite characters, making you question their morals, but also putting it in sort of a political landscape to where they're dealing with themes that are far more important than just superhero stuff. The entire conversation around the release of this movie was, are you Team Cap or are you Team Iron Man? The anticipation built up to this movie was incredible. The entire airport sequence was awesome. We get introduced to Spider-Man here. There's a lot to enjoy. I definitely think it can be cheesy, and at times it is overstepping its reach just a bit, but overall I enjoy this a lot more than I used to, so I would have to put this on the B tier. Doctor Strange. I think this is one of the better origin stories in the MCU. It's beautiful to look at. All of the visuals are absolutely stunning. Tilda Swinton as the Ancient One is a great addition to this universe. Benedict Cumberbatch is probably the only person I can think of to play Doctor Strange. Another top tier casting by the MCU. His relationship with Rachel McAdams throughout the movie is also good. The villain is not good. Dormammu, not great whatsoever. But I think the movie is very fun, and it's got enough redeemable qualities to put this one a bit higher. I'm gonna go B tier with this one as well. Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. While not as good as Guardians of the Galaxy, I still think it definitely explores the dynamic of these characters and their family very well. I think the biggest problem with this movie for me, and the one that's held it back from being higher on the list than a lot of people, is that the first movie was humorous. This one takes it to another level. I always enjoy comedy, especially in these movies, but there's a way that they can do it at times to where it makes it just overbearing, and it takes away the importance of the heavier moments, and I think that's what this movie does here, is it has a lot of darker themes and a lot of moments that are more emotional that feel very undercut by the humor. a significant step down from Volume 1 for me. So I would have to put Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 in the C tier. Spider-Man Homecoming, the first solo Spidey movie in the MCU. I think it feels like a coming-of-age John Hughes-esque movie that really is right up my alley. I think Tom Holland is a very charismatic lead to play this character, and for once, it actually feels like there's a teenager being portrayed here. Michael Keaton as Vulture is one of the better villains in the MCU as well. You really feel for Peter here as he's trying to get things figured out for himself, as he's trying to become the friendly neighborhood Spider-Man, but also someone who knows that he's worth something greater. After being in Captain America Civil War, he knows he wants to fight with the team, but he's got to earn it, and he's got to show Tony Stark that he can prove himself. The biggest downfall for me, though, speaking of Tony Stark, is that at times it does feel like he's Iron Boy Jr., like he can't do anything on his own, but I feel like that was the point of this movie to an extent, and that's to make him learn that if he's nothing without Tony, if he's nothing without the Avengers, then he shouldn't be a hero at all. Not perfect, but extremely enjoyable, so I would have to put Spider-Man Homecoming in the A tier. Then we have Thor Ragnarok. I like a lot of what this movie does, just simply that it finally makes you feel like they figured out what they're doing with the Thor character, whether it's cutting the short hair to him just having more of a confidence and a secureness within the role. There's a lot of great action sequences in this movie, and I think Hela is actually a top tier villain. But again, this is an example of a movie that relies way too heavily on the humor that it sort of takes away from those parts that I did enjoy. It's not the worst Thor movie, we'll get to that one very soon, but it's not my favorite either. So for that reason, I'd have to put it in the C tier, right next to Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. Then we have Black Panther. This movie was obviously very culturally impactful, and it accomplished a lot of success. It was the first comic book movie to be nominated for Best Picture at the Oscars. It racked in a ton of money, and Chadwick Boseman, rest in peace, was a great addition to this universe, a great casting as this character. I can't picture anybody else playing his role. Overall, the movie's a lot of fun. I will say that there are moments that it takes me out because of the overwhelming use of CGI that just doesn't look that good, and it can be all over the place at times from a narrative perspective, but when you get to the core of the movie, I think it's very powerful. Also, Michael B. Jordan as Killmonger is a great villain. There's plenty of fun to be had, so I'll have to put this one in the B tier. Then we have Avengers Infinity War. This is going at the top of my list. I love this movie. The conversation has always been which is better, Avengers Infinity War or Endgame, and for my opinion, I much prefer Infinity War. In fact, it is probably my favorite Marvel movie just because for once the heroes lost. I'm not used to going to a movie like this and coming out feeling disappointed because the characters I thought were going to win lost, but they did that here, and it did enough to make you really look forward to that next movie to see how things were going to get fixed, how they were going to wrap up. It's just a movie that worked a lot better for me, and still to this day, I have not felt as much emotion with any other Marvel movie as I have watching this movie. Then we have Ant-Man and the Wasp. I'm gonna go ahead and throw this movie in the B tier. I have a lot of fun with this movie. I think it was a great bit of levity after the events of Avengers Infinity War and the weight that that movie brought. It's just a fun, again, small scale, contained story. And in the mix, we do get some elements that I'm not a huge fan of. Overall, Lawrence Fishburne's character, as well as Ghost as a villain, was not very compelling. But this movie provided enough laughs and enough heart for me that I really enjoyed it. It wasn't trying to do too much, but what it did do, I appreciated. Captain Marvel, yeah, that's gonna go in the F tier. I'm not a Brie Larson hater. All the people on the internet that want these movies to fail just because Brie Larson's in it, you can shove it. In fact, I was really excited for this movie because Brie Larson was in it. She's a great actress, an Oscar winner, for goodness sake. But the movie itself was just very underwhelming. Not only is it extremely dark, and by that I mean a lot of the stuff that goes on, you can't really see it. The action is cut so heavily that you don't really feel any of the weight. She just felt very one note, didn't have a lot of dynamic range to her character. She was sort of emotionless. Overall, it's just a slog to get through. Avengers Endgame. This is gonna go in the S tier. I still love this movie. I don't like it as much as I did when I first came out of the theater after seeing it for the very first time, but I still think it is top tier MCU quality. The final hour of this movie is probably the best final hour out of all of these movies. It's incredibly fun to see. A theater experience that I'll never get again. And such a massive payoff to all of the movies that I've been watching for so many years. Spider-Man Far From Home, that's going in the F category as well. I genuinely think this is one of the worst movies in the universe. I don't enjoy it whatsoever. I don't think it should have come out after Endgame, and I think because of that, it resulted in a movie that almost sort of made Spider-Man backtrack as a character. He's low-key stupid in this movie. Everything that he learned in the previous films, every bit of growth he had, just totally goes away. Tony Stark is gone now and he's heartbroken about it, so he doesn't know what to do anymore. Again, he doesn't know how to be a hero on his own, and the entire movie is him, again, learning how to be a hero on his own. The humor is also so cheesy here. It does not work for me. It doesn't land at all. And it's got some of the worst CGI I've seen in any Marvel movie to date. The entire sequence where they're traveling on the bus and he's using the Eden glasses, that was god-awful. The only redeeming quality of the movie is at the end when Mysterio reveals his identity. The rest of it, forget it. Up next is Black Widow. I'm going to put this movie in the C tier. I think there's plenty to enjoy here. It's not bad. I just feel like the movie came out too late. And so because of that, nothing felt very impactful. It didn't feel like there was any significance or weight behind any of the events going on. It felt like the entire purpose of this movie was to introduce Yelena and Red Guardian as characters that could show up later on in the MCU, which with the Thunderbolts coming out now confirms my suspicions. It's a victim of the pandemic, therefore a lot of the CGI in the movie is also very bad, and I also think they fumbled the bag hard when it comes to the villain of Taskmaster here. Taskmaster is a villain that has a lot of potential to be something great, to be something menacing. Obviously, it's somebody who can adapt all of the characteristics and abilities of every other hero, but the way that they handled the character just felt very underwhelming. The reveal of who the character was genuinely very bad. But at its core, it's a movie about family, and when they dive into that idea of family, the movie is really strong. It's not terrible, it's just not one of the best. Then we have Shang-Chi. I'm gonna put this in the A tier. I had a lot of fun with this movie. I think it's definitely one of the better character introductions within the MCU, especially for a first solo outing. It's got great action, just very fun. It's very comedic at times in a way that feels organic and works for me. I love the idea of bringing more kung fu into the universe. It feels very fitting and it's fresh. Really, I just can't wait to see what they do with the character next. Then we have The Eternals, another movie I'm gonna put sadly in the F category. A lot of people love this movie. And if you're one of those people, I commend you, because I absolutely did not. The whole movie is based on setup. It's about introducing all of these new characters, but the introductions go on for 2.5 hours, and we never really get into the meat of the plot. Also, there's a big problem I have with it to where they reveal the villain's motivation midway through, so the rest of the movie is playing catch up with these characters to figure out the same thing we already know. So when the reveal actually happens for them, there is no impact whatsoever. Also, some of the characters at times just tend to go away for unknown reasons and we don't see them again. It's visually stunning, it's good to look at, but it's narratively a complete mess. Next is Spider-Man No Way Home, another movie that I really enjoyed, and in fact, I'll have to put this in the S tier as well. The theater experience for this was unreal. Seeing all three Spider-Man together on the screen is something that I never thought would be possible, but something that absolutely blew me away and meant so much to me. Andrew Garfield is my favorite Spider-Man, so obviously seeing him once again as the character was very fun. I think this movie as a whole has a lot of emotional weight to it. There's a lot of heavy-hitting moments with him losing Aunt May in this movie. Obviously, it was heartbreaking and hard to watch, but through that, you see him really have to find himself, discover his purpose, and realize what he's actually fighting for. The first half of the movie can be a bit rough because it does feel like a lot of just cameos and all over the place at times, but flaws and all, this is a movie I really love. Doctor Strange Multiverse of Madness. This movie rocks. Sure, it's Cameo Fest the movie. There are cameos left and right that don't really serve the narrative too much at all, But what I do love about this movie is it's Sam Raimi's vision through and through. It's his style, and he really works well with the formula of the universe. It's gnarly with its visuals, just like the first one, except it takes it up a notch. It's dark, it's twisted. I love Wanda in this movie too. So you know what? I think it's messy, but in a way that I appreciate. And I think I'm going to put it all the way up on the A tier. How about it? Thor, Love and Thunder, F. F, 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 F. With all the progress they made for Thor as a character in Ragnarok, they completely backslid with this movie. It takes all of the elements that worked and throws it out the window and just leaves you with what I didn't want more of. It's overly comedic, most of the humor does not work. Christian Bale is Gore the God Butcher, but they completely waste his character. You barely see him throughout the movie, and then once you do see him, it's menacing, it's great, but then too quickly, his arc changes and the conflict is resolved, so you just feel like you don't get enough with him at all. And I think Jane is great in this movie, but the entire area where she gets the powers and she's able to wield Mjolnir now is completely glossed over, and it's in a split second she has all of these powers out of nowhere. The movie's atrocious. It's really not good. It's terrible. I hate it. Black Panther Wakanda Forever had a very tough task. Obviously, they were left with terrible circumstances that were Chadwick Boseman's passing, and the fact that they were able to make this movie at all was incredibly impressive. But I feel like they channeled their grief in real life into the story itself and crafted a movie that was very emotional, felt very heavy in its themes and the weight of the loss of Chadwick, but not only that, of King T'Challa. And they navigated it as well as they possibly could have. I think this movie has a lot of great visuals, a lot of great action set pieces, but it's very character-centric, and I think especially dissecting Shuri as a character in this movie was about the best bet they could have possibly gone with to make this movie work. Letitia Wright as Shuri plays that character so well. She channels her emotion into her performance. On top of that, Angela Bassett is great. And Tenoch Huerta as Namor is a captivating villain. I really think this is the best possible way they could have ended Phase 4. They really ended it on a high note. I'm gonna have to put this one all the way up on the A tier. It's weird to put this above the first Black Panther, but I think overall it is a better movie with a stronger narrative. And as tough as the circumstances were, I think they used what they had to the fullest extent and just made a movie that was very emotionally impactful and resonant. Ant-Man the Wasp Quantumania. This movie goes into F. It's my least favorite. I hate it. I didn't even do a review for this movie because I was so disappointed. I love Ant-Man. I really enjoy Ant-Man and the Wasp. Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania was a complete disappointment. It was a disaster. It looked horrendous. The first 30 minutes of this movie, I was considering walking out, and it doesn't get better from there. It gets worse. It's a CGI schlock fest where all of the characters are split up and go on separate journeys. It feels like a Star Wars ripoff, and it's also trying to introduce a new villain that's supposed to be the big bad of this next phase, but he feels very underwhelming and underwritten. The performances are half-baked. It looks very bad. MODOK as a character, complete joke. There's very little redeeming qualities about this movie, and after I got out of watching it for the first time, I was about ready to throw in the towel for the MCU because I thought they're obviously not getting better. They are only getting worse. This was horrible. But lastly, we have the new kid on the block, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. This one has quickly cemented itself as an S-tier movie. I'm gonna put it between Avengers Infinity War and Iron Man because I absolutely love this movie, and it is by far one of my favorites. More than ever, James Gunn was able to inject humanity into these characters and make you really feel for them. It's definitely Rocket's story, but every character gets a moment to shine, and I think the entire arc of the story is these characters learning that, yeah, they had these individual journeys that were very hard, but what's more important is that they're stronger together, and it doesn't matter about where you've come from, it's about where you're going and who you have surrounding you. I was emotional, I was moved, I felt a lot of things through watching this movie. I think it is the most grand in scale thing we've gotten since Avengers Endgame, but it might be more well constructed than Avengers Endgame. The soundtrack, again, killer. And the resolution for all these characters felt very fitting. I was just satisfied. It cemented itself as one of my favorite MCU movies. It cemented Guardians of the Galaxy as the best trilogy in the MCU. There's a lot to love about this movie. I just had to put it that high. So there you have it, guys, my tier list of the MCU. I tried to be pretty short with my thoughts, but I feel like the video went on forever. But make sure to comment down below and let me know your ranking of these movies. Tell me, what are your S tier MCU movies? I'd like to hear it. But also, make sure to leave a like on the video and subscribe if you haven't already. And until next time, I'll see y'all later. Peace out.